As a loving mother, I spent my whole life trying to help my son without expecting anything in return. I wanted him to have everything. But when he told me that I did nothing for him, it first broke my heart, and then made me angry, and I realized that I would not let it go. The dining room glowed under the chandelier's soft light, its crystal prisms scattering rainbows across the polished mahogany table. The air smelled of roasted lamb and expensive Merlot, but the warmth was a lie. I sat at the edge of my chair, my navy blouse feeling too tight, my fork hovering over a plate of barely touched food. Theodore's voice boomed across the table, his face flushed from wine and irritation. Harper, his wife, lounged beside him, her manicured nails tapping her phone, a smirk curling her lips. The room was theirs, every gleaming Celt, every silk curtain, but I'd paid for it. 5 years of my savings, my dreams poured into their mortgage. And tonight it felt like I was choking on every cent. "You're unbelievable, Diana," Theodore snapped, slamming his fist on the table. The crystal vase wobbled, its roses trembling. "You refuse to help with the car? After everything we've done for you?" I froze, my fork clinking against the plate. "Everything you've done?" My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Harper's smirk widened, her eyes flicking up from her phone. "Oh, come on, Diana," she drawled, tossing her blonde hair. "Don't play the martyr. It's just a car. You're not exactly strapped for cash, are you?" My chest tightened. I'd driven here in my decade-old Corolla, parked next to their gleaming BMW. My apartment, a one-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint, waited for me across town. I'd given them this house, this life, and they thought I owed them more. I opened my mouth, but Theodore cut me off. "You've done nothing for me," he said loudly, standing abruptly. "You act like a saint, but you're just looking out for yourself." The word "old" landed like a slap. Silence swallowed the room, thick and heavy. Harper stifled a laugh, her hand covering her mouth. My vision blurred, not with tears but with a rage I hadn't felt in years. My fingers tightened around the fork, the metal biting into my palm. I set it down, deliberate, the clink echoing in the quiet. "Then I'm done," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "No more payments. No more mortgage. You're on your own." Theodore's face twisted, his mouth opening, but I was already moving. I stood, my chair sliding back, and reached into my purse. The keys to their house, keys I'd kept for emergencies, for their convenience, felt cold in my hand. I dropped them onto the table, where they landed with a soft thud on the silk tablecloth, like a curtain falling on a play I was done performing. "Diana, wait," Theodore started. But I was already at the door, my coat slung over my arm. Harper's laughter followed me, sharp and mocking, as I stepped into the chilly Chicago night. The memory hit me as I climbed into my car, the engine sputtering to life. 5 years ago, I'd sat in a bank signing the mortgage papers. The teller had smiled, handing me a pen, while I clutched a brochure for a trip to Italy I'd never take. I'd wanted to see Florence, to sketch the Duomo under a Tuscan sun. Instead, I'd given Theodore and Harper this house, believing their promises of gratitude, of family. I'd traded my dreams for their roof, and they'd spat in my face. I pulled out my phone, the screen's glow harsh against the dark. My banking app loaded, showing the latest mortgage payment. $3,200 withdrawn last week. My finger hovered over the cancel button. My heart pounded, not with fear but with something sharper, something alive. They thought I was nothing. They were wrong. I wasn't just walking away. I was starting something. My apartment smelled of coffee and old books, the kind of comfort that comes from living small. The living room was cramped, the sagging couch barely holding its own against the stack of folders on the coffee table. I sat at my desk, a thrift store find, my laptop open to a spreadsheet. Numbers danced across the screen, payments, withdrawals, Theodore and Harper's financial life laid bare. I'd been a bookkeeper for 20 years. I knew how to find cracks in a facade. And their facade was crumbling. The doorbell buzzed, sharp and insistent, like a wasp trapped in a jar. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. 2 days after the dinner, and here they were, Theodore and Harper, storming my doorstep. I opened the door and Theodore barged in, his cologne overpowering, his face red with fury. Harper trailed behind, her Gucci bag swinging, her heels clicking on my scuffed hardwood. "You've lost your mind, Diana," Theodore bellowed, pacing the room like a caged animal. He knocked a framed photo off the shelf, a younger him, smiling at a graduation I'd paid for. The glass cracked and I flinched, but I didn't move to pick it up. "You think you can just cut us off? Destroy our lives?" Harper leaned against the wall, inspecting her nails. "Honestly, Diana, this is so dramatic," she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "It's just money. Why make it personal?" I sat at my desk, my hands folded, my face calm. Inside, my heart was a drumbeat, steady but fierce. It's always been personal, I said, my voice low. You just didn't notice. Theodore stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? Your family, Diana. You don't abandon family. Family. The word tasted like ash. I remembered a party 3 years ago, Harper holding court in a glittering dress, a champagne flute in her hand. Oh, my mother-in-law's a saint, she told her friends, her laugh sharp as glass. She pays for everything. Our house, our life. She's like our personal ATM. I'd overheard from the kitchen, my hands wrist-deep in dishwater, my throat tight with shame. I thought I was helping. I'd been their fool. You're not getting another dime, I said, my eyes locked on Theodore's. You'll have to figure it out. Harper laughed, a short, incredulous bark. Figure it out? Do you know what this will do to us? The bank's already breathing down our necks. She caught herself, her lips pressing tight, but it was too late. I'd heard the crack in their armor. I glanced at my laptop, the spreadsheet still open. A line caught my eye. A withdrawal, $5,000 labeled consulting fees, to a company that didn't exist. Harper's name was on the account. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face blank. You should go, I said, standing. I gestured to the door, my hand steady. Theodore sputtered, his fists clenching, but Harper grabbed his arm, her eyes flicking to the folders on my table. She knew I was digging. She just didn't know how deep. This isn't over, Diana, Theodore growled as they left, Harper's heels echoing down the hall. I closed the door, the lock clicking with a finality that felt like a promise. Silence settled, heavy but alive. I sat back at my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. That withdrawal wasn't a mistake. It was a thread, and I was going to pull until their world unraveled. My office was a cocoon of quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights blending with the faint drip of the coffee maker. Papers spilled across my desk, a chaotic map of Theodore and Harper's financial sins. I'd been at it for hours, my eyes burning, my fingers stained with ink. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered through the window. But I was lost in numbers, in the truth they hid. I was a bookkeeper, not a detective, but today the line felt blurry. I opened a drawer, my hand brushing an old sketchbook, its edges frayed from years of neglect. I pulled it out, the weight familiar, heavy with dreams I'd buried. A pencil sketch of a Tuscan hillside stared back at me, drawn when I was 20, when I thought I'd be an artist. I'd given that up for Theodore's education, for his future. I remembered him at 18, his eyes bright, promising to make me proud. I'll pay you back, Mom, he'd said, hugging me outside the bank where I'd emptied my savings for his tuition. I'd believed him. I'd been wrong. I pushed the sketchbook aside and returned to the spreadsheet. A line jumped out, another consulting fee, $7,000, wired to the same non-existent company. Harper's signature was on the transfer. My stomach twisted, not with shock but with clarity. She wasn't just careless. She was reckless, maybe even criminal. I jotted the details in my notebook, my handwriting sharp, deliberate. The phone rang, shattering the silence. I answered, my voice clipped. Diana speaking. Mrs. Ellis, it's Tom from First National, the banker said, his tone cautious. You asked about the mortgage on the Oakwood property? Yes, I said, leaning forward, my pen poised. What's the status? He hesitated. There's activity. Missed payments before you stepped in. And some recent inquiries about refinancing. They're in deep, Diana. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Theodore and Harper weren't just ungrateful. They were drowning. And I'd been their lifeline until now. I opened another file, a credit report I'd pulled yesterday. Late payments, maxed out cards, a second lien on the house they hadn't told me about. My lips pressed tight, not in anger but in resolve. I remembered another moment, a decade ago, selling my paintings at a garage sale to cover Theodore's first apartment. I'd stood in the driveway watching a stranger walk away with my canvas of a stormy sea. The frame chipped but the colors alive. I told myself it was worth it, that family came first. But family didn't mock you. Family didn't call you nothing. I tore the Tuscan sketch from the book, the paper ripping with a sound that felt final. It fluttered to the floor, a relic of a woman I wasn't anymore. I grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and started a list. Missed payments. Fake consulting fees. Second lien. Each word was a step, a plan taking shape. I wasn't just stopping payments. I was going to expose them piece by piece until they had nowhere to hide. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. We need to talk, Diana. Name a time. No signature, but I knew Harper's tone, her arrogance. I set the phone down, my eyes on the list. Let her come. I was ready. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my office, casting shadows on the stacks of papers around me. The air smelled of ink and stale coffee. the printer humming softly in the corner. I typed the final line of the email. Attached are records of questionable expenses submitted by Harper Ellis, including $12,000 in falsified travel reimbursements. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. This was it, my first move. Not a shout, not a scene, but a quiet, precise cut. I'd spent 2 weeks digging, cross-referencing Harper's expense reports against her firm's records. The numbers didn't lie. She'd been skimming for years. I used a burner email, untraceable, and addressed it to Harper's boss at the marketing firm. My heart thudded, not with fear but with a thrill I hadn't felt in decades. I clicked send, and the laptop soft chime felt like a door slamming shut on the old Diana. I leaned back, my chair creaking, and let the silence settle. It wasn't enough to stop their mortgage payments. I wanted them to feel the ground shift beneath them just as I had. I remembered a lunch a year ago at a trendy cafe near Harper's office. I'd stopped by to drop off a check. Another emergency for their lifestyle. Harper was at a table with colleagues, her laugh sharp as she bragged about creative accounting. "You just pad the expenses," she'd said, twirling a cocktail straw. "No one checks." I'd stood by the door unnoticed, my purse heavy with the check. She hadn't seen me, but I'd seen her, clearly. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. A text from a friend at Harper's firm. "Big stir today. Audit teams coming in." I smiled, small but real. The dominoes were falling. Across town in their oak-paneled living room, Harper's phone rang. She was sprawled on a cream sofa, fashion magazines scattered like confetti. The caller ID showed her boss's name, and her stomach dropped. "Harper, we need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. "There's been a complaint. Discrepancies in your expense reports. The auditors are starting tomorrow." "What?" Harper's voice cracked. She stood, knocking a magazine to the floor. "That's impossible. It's a mistake." "It better be," her boss said. "Fix this or you're done." The line went dead. Harper's hands shook as she tossed the phone onto the sofa. "Theodore!" she screamed, her heels clicking as she stormed to the kitchen. He was at the counter pouring whiskey, his tie loose. "This is your fault," she snapped. "You said no one would notice." "Me?" Theodore slammed the glass down, amber liquid sloshing. "You're the one who couldn't stop spending. Now what, Harper? We're screwed." Their voices rose, a cacophony of blame, as the room's elegance mocked their panic. Harper's eyes darted to the coffee table, where a set of spare keys, mine left behind, glinted under the chandelier. She froze, her breath catching. "Diana," she whispered, the name a curse. Back in my office, I opened my notebook, the pages filled with dates, amounts, plans. I wrote one line. "This is just the beginning." The pen scratched softly, a sound as satisfying as the email's chime. I closed the book, my fingers lingering on its leather cover. Somewhere, a phone was ringing again, and I knew whose it was. The community center buzzed with chatter, plastic wine glasses clinking under the glow of string lights. I stood near a table of hors d'oeuvres, my simple black dress a stark contrast to the sequin gowns around me. For the first time in years, I felt at ease, laughing with Ellen, my oldest friend. Her silver earrings caught the light as she leaned in, whispering about the silent auction. "You're glowing, Diana," she said, squeezing my arm. "It's like you're finally you again." I smiled, sipping my wine. 3 weeks since the dinner, and I was starting to believe her. I'd come to this charity event, something I'd avoided when my life revolved around Theodore's demands. Tonight, I was here for me. The doors swung open, and the room's hum faltered. Theodore stormed in, his face a thundercloud, Harper trailing behind in a tight red dress, her earrings glinting like daggers. Heads turned, whispers rippling. I set my glass down, my spine straightening. "Here we go. Diana." Theodore's voice cut through the crowd, raw and accusing. He shoved past a waiter, knocking a tray of canapes to the floor. "You think you can ruin us? Destroy our family?" Harper stepped forward, her eyes glistening with practiced tears. "She's jealous," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "She can't stand our success, so she's sabotaging us." The crowd parted, eyes darting between us. I felt Ellen tense beside me, but I stayed still, my hands clasped. "You're making a scene," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. "And you're wrong." "Wrong?" Theodore laughed, bitter and loud. "You stopped our payments. You're tearing our lives apart." I tilted my head, meeting his gaze. "You did that yourselves, Theodore. I just stopped cleaning up your mess." A murmur ran through the crowd. Harper's tears vanished, her lips curling. "You're being unfair," she said sharply. "You're just holding a grudge." Ellen stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Enough. Diana's done more for you than you deserve. Everyone here knows it." She gestured to the crowd, and I saw nods, heard whispers. They knew. The neighbors, the friends, the people who'd watched me fade into Theodore's shadow. Theodore's face reddened, his hands balling into fists, but Harper grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "This isn't over," she spat, her heels clicking as they retreated. The room exhaled, conversations resuming, but I felt the weight of every glance. Not pity, respect. Later at home, I sat at my kitchen table, a notebook open to a business plan. Ellen's words echoed. "You're finally you again." I'd started drafting ideas for a consulting firm, leveraging my bookkeeping expertise. Tonight's scene hadn't shaken me. It had fueled me. I sketched a logo, a simple key, freedom, control mine. My phone buzzed, a message from Ellen. "You were incredible. Keep going." I smiled, my pen moving faster. I wasn't their victim anymore. I was their reckoning. My new office smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The walls bare except for a single plaque. Ellis Consulting. I'd hung it myself, the brass gleaming under the fluorescent lights. A month after the dinner, and I was building something, my own empire, small but mine. I sat at a desk, still cluttered with unpacked boxes, preparing for a meeting with a contact from Theodore's logistics firm. His name was Mark, an old colleague I'd known from holiday parties, back when Theodore still invited me. Today, I'd use that connection to tighten the screws. Mark arrived, his handshake firm, his smile cautious. "Good to see you, Diana," he said, settling into a chair. "Heard you're starting fresh. Impressive." "Thanks," I said, pouring coffee. "I'm just glad to be moving forward." I paused, stirring my cup, then added, casual as a breeze. "By the way, I heard Theodore's up for that promotion. Though, I worry he's cutting corners. Like using the company car for personal trips. Not exactly ethical, is it?" Mark's brow furrowed, his pen tapping his notepad. "That's concerning," he said. "I'll pass it along. Discreetly, of course." "Of course," I said, my smile warm, my pulse steady. I'd seen Theodore's car parked at a casino last month, the company logo glaring under neon lights. He thought he was untouchable. He wasn't. I remembered years of watching him coast, charming bosses, dodging work, leaning on connections. At a company picnic, he'd brag to colleagues about working the system, his arm around Harper, while I stood by the grill flipping burgers for his team. I'd thought it was ambition. It was laziness, dressed up in a suit. Across town, Theodore sat in his office, papers strewn across his desk. His phone buzzed, his boss's name flashing. "Ellis, we need to talk," the voice said cold. "There's an issue with your conduct. The promotion's off the table." Theodore's hand tightened around the phone, the plastic creaking. "What issue?" he demanded, but the line was already dead. He slammed a fist on the desk, papers scattering. At home, he found Harper pacing their living room, her face pale. "They're suspending me pending the audit," she snapped. "And now you blow your promotion? What's wrong with you?" "Me," Theodore shouted, tossing his keys onto the counter. "You're the one who got us into this mess." Their voices clashed, the room a battlefield, until Harper stormed out, slamming the door. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the tick of a clock. Back in my office, I signed my first client contract, a small business needing bookkeeping help. The pen glided across the paper, each stroke a declaration. I was building a life, brick by brick, while theirs crumbled. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Theodore, his voice low, threatening. "You're playing a dangerous game, Diana." I deleted it, my eyes on the plaque. Dangerous? Maybe. But I was winning. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and burnt espresso, its low hum of chatter wrapping around me like a worn blanket. I sat by the window, my fingers tracing the rim of a coffee mug, the steam curling upward in lazy spirals. 6 weeks since that fateful dinner, and Theodore had begged for this meeting, his text desperate. "Please, Mom, we need to talk." I'd agreed, not out of hope but curiosity. What could they possibly say now? The door chimed, and Theodore shuffled in, his suit wrinkled, his eyes shadowed. Harper followed, her designer bag scuffed, her lipstick uneven. They looked like actors in a play gone wrong, their polish fading. I didn't stand, didn't smile, just watched as they slid into the booth across from me. "Diana," Theodore started, his voice low, almost trembling. "We're sorry. We didn't mean for things to get this bad. Can't we fix this?" I raised an eyebrow, stirring my coffee slowly. The spoon clinked against the ceramic, a steady rhythm. "Fix what, Theodore? Your gratitude? Or your bank account?" Harper leaned forward, her hands clasped, her nails chipped. "Look, we know we messed up," she said, her tone softer than I'd ever heard. But her eyes flickered with irritation. "Just help us with the mortgage again. One last time. We'll change, I swear." I remembered their wedding 5 years ago, the memory sharp as a blade. I'd stood in a rented dress, signing a check for the venue, the flowers, the band. All while Harper laughed with her bridesmaids, her diamond earrings catching the light. I'd skipped meals to cover that day, telling myself it was for family. Theodore had hugged me, promising, "We'll make it up to you." He hadn't. "You think apologies erase years of taking?" I said, my voice cold, cutting through their pleas. "I know about your debts, your missed payments. You're drowning, and I'm not your lifeline anymore." Theodore's face crumpled, his fingers tugging at his cuff. "Mom, please," he whispered. "The bank's calling every day. We could lose the house." "Then lose it," I said, setting my mug down. The table shook slightly, coffee sloshing onto the napkin. "You made your choices." Harper's mask slipped, her lips curling. "You're heartless," she hissed. "You'd rather see us on the street than lift a finger." I stood, my coat draped over my arm. "You lifted nothing for me," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "Good luck." I left the coffee half drunk, the door chiming as I stepped into the crisp Chicago air. Across town, their house was dim, a single lamp flickering in the living room. Theodore and Harper sat on opposite ends of the sofa, a bank notice on the coffee table, its red ink screaming past due. "She's doing this to spite us," Harper spat, tearing the notice in half. Theodore buried his face in his hands, the silence between them heavier than the debt. Back in my office, I sifted through emails, new client inquiries for Ellis Consulting, each one a spark of joy. My fingers danced across the keyboard, scheduling meetings, building a future. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And they were learning what it meant to fall. Ellen's living room was warm, the kind of cozy that comes from mismatched pillows and candles flickering on every surface. The air smelled of lavender and red wine, and laughter spilled from the guests, old friends, neighbors, people who'd known me before I became Theodore's bank. I stood by the fireplace, a glass of Merlot in hand, my navy blazer sharp against the soft glow. 2 months since the dinner, and I felt like a new woman, my consulting firm growing, my confidence blooming. Tonight I wasn't hiding. "Diana, tell us about your business," Ellen called, her smile wide as she refilled glasses. The room turned to me, eyes curious, warm. I took a sip, letting the moment settle. "It's been a journey," I said, my voice steady. "I've spent years helping others, bookkeeping, sacrifices, you know how it goes." I paused, my gaze sweeping the room. Like paying for a house I didn't live in, for family who didn't appreciate it. A murmur rippled through the group, heads tilting, eyebrows raising. "Oh, Diana," a neighbor said, her voice soft. "You mean Theodore and Harper?" I nodded, my smile small but deliberate. "I thought I was helping," I said. "But sometimes you realize people take more than they give." The words were gentle, but they landed like stones. Whispers grew, eyes darting. They knew the stories, Harper's flashy parties, Theodore's arrogance. I didn't need to say more. I remembered a gathering like this 3 years ago at a country club. Harper had held court, her laugh sharp, her dress glittering. "Diana's so quaint," she'd said, loud enough for me to hear, her friends giggling. "Always fussing over numbers. No wonder she's alone." I'd stood by the buffet, my hands clutching a plate, my face burning. I'd swallowed the hurt, thinking it was my place. Not anymore. Across town, Harper sat in her dim living room, the chandelier unlit, the air stale. Her phone rang, a friend's name flashing. "Harper, I'm sorry," the voice said, hesitant. "The group's not inviting you to the next event. People are talking." "Talking?" Harper's voice cracked, her hands shaking as she gripped the phone. "About what?" "Diana's lies." "It's not just her," the friend said. "Everyone knows you leaned on her. It's awkward now." The call ended and Harper hurled the phone at the couch, a scream tearing from her throat. She tore an old invitation from the table, the paper fluttering to the floor like ash. Back at Ellen's, I adjusted the brooch on my blazer, a gift from Theodore years ago, when he still called me Mom with warmth. It gleamed now, a reminder of what I'd reclaimed. The night wound down, guests hugging me, promising to call about my services. I drove to my office, the city lights blurring past. An email waited. An invitation to speak at a business conference. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and smiled. The truth was a weapon, and I wielded it well. Somewhere a door was closing, and I wasn't the one locked out. The fluorescent lights in Harper's office buzzed like a dying insect, casting harsh shadows on her desk, now stripped bare. She stood frozen, a cardboard box in her arms, the contents rattling. A cracked photo frame, a chipped mug, remnants of a life unraveling. Her boss, a stern man in a gray suit, stood by the door, his voice flat. "You're done, Harper." The audit confirmed everything. "Clean out and leave. This is a mistake," Harper shouted, her voice cracking, her heels scuffing the carpet. "I built this department. You can't just." "We can." he said, turning away. Security's waiting. The door clicked shut, and silence swallowed the room. Harper stumbled to her car, the box thudding into the trunk. She remembered my email, that anonymous dagger, and her hand shook. I'd done this. Me. The woman she'd called nothing. 10 weeks ago, I'd sat in my old office, a sketch of a business plan tucked in a drawer. I dreamed of my own firm, of helping small businesses grow, but Theodore's needs always came first. His tuition, his apartment, his wedding. I'd pushed my dreams aside, telling myself there'd be time later. There wasn't. Until now. Across town, Theodore sat in a bank, the air thick with the scent of paper and desperation. He scrawled his signature on a loan agreement, the interest rate a noose around his neck. The banker slid the documents back, her face blank. You're approved, Mr. Ellis. First payment's due in 30 days. Theodore nodded, his tie askew, his forehead slick with sweat. At home, Harper was waiting, her box still in the car. Alone, she screamed, pacing their living room, the curtains drawn. You think this'll save us? We're ruined. You got fired. Theodore shot back, tossing his keys onto the counter. What was I supposed to do? Their dog whimpered, ducking under the sofa, as their voices echoed off the walls. Meanwhile, I stood in a hotel ballroom, my new silk dress catching the chandelier's light. The stage was set for a local business awards ceremony, and I was here for Ellis Consulting, named a rising star in consulting. I adjusted my earrings, my reflection sharp in a nearby mirror. The old Diana, timid sacrificial, was gone. The MC called my name and I stepped onto the stage, the applause warm, real. I gripped the crystal statuette, its weight grounding me. This is for everyone who bets on themselves, I said, my voice clear, carrying to the back of the room. For those who rebuild no matter the odds. The crowd stood, clapping, and I saw Ellen in the front row, her eyes shining. I'd built this, my firm, my life, from the ashes of their betrayal. Backstage, I checked my phone. A text from a contact at the bank, confirming Theodore's loan. I smiled, slipping the phone into my purse. They were digging their own grave, and I was holding the shovel. My office was a sanctuary of order, the morning light streaming through clean windows, glinting off the brass plaque that read, Ellis Consulting. The air smelled of fresh coffee and new paper, a stack of contracts neatly aligned on my desk. 3 months since that dinner, and I was no longer the woman who begged for scraps of gratitude. Today I was meeting Tom, my old banker friend, to tie the last knot in my plan. The house, their house, the one I'd paid for, was slipping through their fingers, and I was here to ensure it fell. Tom sat across from me, his tie slightly crooked, his notepad open. Diana, you're sure about this? He asked, his voice cautious. Pushing the foreclosure. It's a big step. I leaned forward, my hands folded, my smile polite but unyielding. It's not personal, Tom, I said, my tone smooth as glass. The bank has a responsibility to act on delinquent accounts. Their payments stopped months ago. You've seen the numbers. He nodded, jotting a note. Fair enough. I'll expedite the process. The auction's set for next week. I shook his hand, my grip firm, and watched him leave. The door clicked shut, and silence settled, sharp and satisfying. I dreamed of a home once, a small cottage with a garden, where I could paint and breathe. I'd given that up for Theodore's mansion, signing away my savings while he promised forever family. I'd been a fool then. Not now. I remembered standing in a realtor's office 20 years ago, a brochure of a cozy bungalow in my hand. The agent had smiled, pointing out the sunroom, perfect for an artist. I'd almost signed, but Theodore's call came, another emergency, another tuition bill. I tucked the brochure away, choosing his future over mine. The memory stung, but it fueled me. Across town, their house was a ghost of its former glory, the lawn patchy, the shutters peeling. Theodore and Harper stood in the living room, a bank letter on the coffee table, its words stark, foreclosure auction 7 days. Harper's hand shook as she tore it open, her voice a snarl. This is your fault, Theodore. You said we'd manage. Me. Theodore roared, punching the wall, the plaster cracking. You blew our savings. You got fired. His keys jangled as he threw them onto the counter, the sound echoing in the hollow space. Harper's eyes blazed, her fingers ripping off her wedding ring. She flung it onto the table, where it spun, glinting under a flickering bulb. I'm done, she spat, storming toward the door. You're nothing without me. The door slammed and Theodore sank onto the sofa, the silence suffocating. Outside, the for sale sign swayed in the wind. My phone buzzed, Ellen with news. They're fighting. Harper left him. I smiled, opening a new contract on my desk, my pen gliding across the page. The signature was a flourish, a seal on their fate. Justice wasn't loud. It was precise, relentless. I set the pen down, my eyes on the city skyline. The auction was coming and I'd be watching. The auction was a cold affair, held on the front lawn of what used to be their palace. A gray sky hung low, the wind rattling the sold sign staked in the dirt. Theodore stood at the edge of the crowd, his coat too thin, his face hollow. Harper was beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes red but dry. Strangers milled around, their voices a low hum as the auctioneer's gavel rose and fell. Sold, he barked, the word final like a door slamming shut. The house, their status, their lie was gone. My phone rang as I stood in the community center, adjusting my scarf before the ceremony. Theodore's name flashed and I answered, my voice cool. What do you want? Mom, he said, his voice breaking, barely audible over the auction's din. I'm sorry. For everything. Please, can we talk? I paused, my fingers tightening around the phone. 3.5 months ago, his words might have swayed me. Not now. You had years to talk, I said, my tone ice. Your apologies are too late. I hung up, the silence that followed as sharp as the gavel's crack. I remember dreaming of that house years ago when I'd first signed the mortgage. I'd pictured family dinners, laughter, a place where love lived. Instead, I got Harper's smirks, Theodore's demands. I'd stood in the kitchen washing dishes after their parties, my hands raw, my heart emptier than the sink. I'd built their dream and they'd torn mine apart. Inside the community center, the air was warm, filled with the buzz of anticipation. I was here for an award, Entrepreneur of the Year, a nod to Ellis Consulting's meteoric rise. Ellen greeted me, her hug fierce. You deserve this, she whispered, her eyes shining. The crowd parted as I walked to my seat, their smiles a chorus of respect. Across town, Harper dragged a suitcase to her car, the wheels scraping the driveway. The ring was still on the table, abandoned. Theodore watched from the window, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. We could have fixed this, he muttered, but she didn't turn back. The car door slammed and she was gone. On stage, the MC handed me a medal, its weight solid, real. The applause roared and I stepped to the microphone. This is for new beginnings, I said, my voice steady, carrying over the crowd. For those who rise, no matter who tries to hold them down. Ellen clapped hardest, tears in her eyes, and I felt the room's warmth wrap around me like a promise kept. I touched the metal, its cool surface grounding me. Justice had been served, not with screams but with strategy, with truth. As I stepped off the stage, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. You'll pay for this, Diana. I deleted it, my steps light. Let them try. My new home was a canvas of light, its white walls catching the morning sun, the scent of jasmine drifting from the garden outside. I stood in the living room, a suitcase open on the hardwood floor, a silk scarf folded neatly inside. A sticker on the suitcase read Italy, the word a promise kept after decades of waiting. 6 months since that dinner and I was finally free to live, to dream, to be Diana, not just a mother, not just a wallet. I tucked a worn brochure into the suitcase, its edges soft from years of handling. At 20, I'd sat in my childhood bedroom, poring over pictures of Florence, sketching the Ponte Vecchio in pencil, dreaming of cobblestone streets and warm gelato. Theodore's needs, school, rent, that house had buried that dream. I told myself I'd go someday. Someday was now. My phone pinged, an email from a client. Diana, your advice saved our business. Thank you. I smiled, typing a reply, my fingers quick, confident. Ellis Consulting was thriving, its reputation built on my expertise, my grit. I'd bought this house with my earnings, its garden a testament to my new roots. Across town, Theodore sat in a cramped apartment, the air stale, a single bulb casting shadows. He flipped through an old photo album, pausing at a picture of me, younger, smiling at his graduation. How did it come to this? He whispered, his voice hoarse. The album closed with a thud, dust rising, the silence heavy with regret. Harper, in another part of the city, scrubbed dishes at a diner, her hands raw, her apron stained. The mirror above the sink was cracked, and she avoided her reflection, her once perfect nails chipped. This is temporary, she told a coworker, her voice brittle. I'll bounce back. But her eyes betrayed her, dull with the weight of starting over. I walked to the window, the garden blooming below. Roses, lavender, a life I'd planted. I remembered their voices, Theodore's, you do nothing for me. Harper's mocking laugh. They'd thought me weak, a doormat. They'd been wrong. I dismantled their world. Not with anger but with precision. Exposing their lies, cutting their lifelines, watching them fall. I touched the brochure again, its paper a bridge to the girl I'd been, the woman I'd become. Justice wasn't just their loss. It was my gain, my freedom. I closed the suitcase, the zippers hum a quiet triumph. Outside, a bird sang and I stepped into the garden, the sun warm on my face. Italy was waiting and so was I. If you like this story, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what impressed you the most about this story. Also, we recommend you to listen to our previous story. It is even more shocking. Just click on the box on the left to play it. Thank you for watching.